what they've been doing since 1973, putting on a spectacle to devoted fans, their painted faces known worldwide. What got us here began 8 hours ago when we met the band in Minneapolis.
Okay, stop scrolling for just a second, because what I'm about to tell you is not what you think you know about Kiss. You know the makeup, you know the fire breathing, the blood spitting, the pyrotechnics. You probably hummed rock and roll all night at some point in your life. Maybe at a concert, maybe at a party back in the day, or hey, maybe in the car this week. No judgment. But behind all of that, behind the costumes and the spectacle and the merchandise empire, there is a story that most fans have never actually heard the full version of. A story involving broken bottles, Nazi symbols, a drummer who tried to attack his own bandmate backstage, anti-Semitism accusations, and a final farewell tour that one of the founding members described as, and I'm quoting here, a deeply miserable and draining experience. This isn't a hit piece. This is the truth. And honestly, it makes the Kiss story even more fascinating. So buckle up, because this one goes deep. Welcome to Hidden Fame Files. Part 1. Where they came from. The guys behind the makeup. Let's start at the beginning, because you cannot understand what Kiss became or what tore them apart without understanding who these four guys actually were before the face paint. Gene Simmons, real name Chaim Witz, born in Israel in 1949, immigrated to the United States with his mother at 8 years old. His father had already abandoned the family. So here's this kid, barely speaks English, new country, no dad, raised by a Holocaust survivor mother who worked multiple jobs just to keep them afloat. That experience, being an outsider, having to fight for everything, became the engine of Gene Simmons' entire personality. And if you've ever seen Gene in an interview, you know the man has never, ever stopped fighting for what he believes he's owed. Paul Stanley, born Stanley Harvey Eisen in Manhattan in 1952. Now here's something most people don't know about Paul. He was born with a condition called microtia. His right ear was completely formed on the outside, but had no ear canal. He was essentially deaf in that ear. Growing up, kids can be brutal, right? He was bullied, felt isolated, and music became his escape. The kid who literally couldn't fully hear the music that would one day make him a rock legend. There's something almost poetic about that. Ace Frehley, born Paul Frehley in the Bronx in 1951. Ace was the class clown, the kid who was always goofing off, always a little bit elsewhere, which, as it turns out, would be a pretty consistent theme throughout his career with Kiss. Funny guy, genuinely talented guitarist, also genuinely unreliable, and we'll get to that. And then there's Peter Criss, born George Peter John Criskula in Brooklyn in 1945, making him the oldest of the four. He grew up rough, got involved with street gangs as a teenager, and music was legitimately his way out of a life that could have gone very badly. Peter Criss had real grit, real street credibility, and also, as we'll see, some real demons that he could never quite shake. Four very different men, four very different backstories, and somehow in New York City in January of 1973, they ended up in the same room together with a very simple but very bold vision: to be the biggest rock band in the world. Part 2. The Climb, Near Bankruptcy, and the album that saved everything. Here's the thing about Kiss that gets glossed over in the legend. They almost didn't make it. I mean that literally. In the early years, they were broke, like actually broke. They were rehearsing in a loft in Manhattan, barely making rent, eating whatever they could scrape together. Their manager at the time, Bill Aucoin, was so convinced about them that he actually put his own personal finances on the line to keep them going. The man was signing personal checks to cover band expenses. That is either extraordinary faith or extraordinary foolishness, maybe a bit of both. Their early albums sold respectably, but they weren't exactly lighting the world on fire. And the critics? Oh, the critics hated them. We're talking dismissive, borderline contemptuous reviews. Rock journalists did not take Kiss seriously. They were seen as a gimmick, too theatrical, too over the top, too commercial. The serious music press in the early 1970s was obsessed with authenticity, and a band that wore demon makeup and breathed fire was not their idea of authentic. But here's where the story turns, and this is the moment that literally changed everything. Kiss releases Alive, a live album recorded at performances in Detroit, Cleveland, Dayton, and Wildwood, New Jersey. And something extraordinary happened. The album exploded. It went platinum. It contained the version of Rock and Roll All Night that everyone knows. And suddenly, Kiss wasn't a gimmick anymore. They were a phenomenon. Now here's where I have to ask you something. Drop it in the comments. Were you a Kiss fan back in the 70s? Did you have the albums, the posters, the merchandise? I genuinely want to know what the band meant to you, because their fan base, the Kiss Army, was unlike anything rock music had seen before. These weren't just fans, they were devoted, and that devotion is what carried the band through everything that was about to go sideways. Okay, this next part is one of the most uncomfortable chapters in Kiss history, and it's one that doesn't get nearly enough attention. In 1976, Kiss embarked on a European tour, and when they arrived in Germany, West Germany at the time, they hit an immediate and serious problem. Their logo. You know it, 2 lightning bolt S letters, bold, sharp, unmistakable. Here's the thing though. Those 2 lightning bolts looked almost identical to the insignia of the SS, the Schutzstaffel, the Nazi paramilitary organization responsible for running the concentration camps during World War II. And Germany, understandably, was not okay with this. The logo was legally banned. Kiss was required to redesign their logo specifically for all German releases and promotional materials. The letters had to be changed so they no longer resembled the SS insignia. So if you've ever seen slightly different-looking Kiss branding from Germany in that era, that's why. Now, to be clear, there's no credible evidence that Kiss intentionally designed their logo to resemble Nazi symbolism. But here's where it gets more complicated. Paul Stanley's memoir later revealed that Ace Frehley reportedly owned Nazi memorabilia, and anti-Semitism allegations within the band, particularly directed at Frehley and Criss, cast a deeply unsettling shadow over the whole thing. Think about that for a second. Gene Simmons, born in Israel, son of a Holocaust survivor, was in a band where at least one member, by Paul Stanley's account, was collecting Nazi artifacts. That is not a minor footnote. That is a genuinely disturbing dynamic that most Kiss coverage just sort of skips past. Now we get to the part of the story that is equal parts tragic and genuinely shocking. By the late 1970s, Kiss was at the peak of their commercial success. The concerts were massive, the merchandise was everywhere, they even had their own Marvel Comics series. But backstage was a completely different story. Peter Criss and Ace Frehley had developed serious substance abuse problems. Both of them have talked about this openly in their own memoirs, so this isn't gossip, it's documented history. Ace in particular had issues with alcohol that were becoming increasingly hard to manage on tour. And Peter Criss had substance issues that were affecting his drumming, his reliability, and his relationships with everyone around him. Meanwhile, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons were essentially teetotalers, completely focused on the business, the brand, the career. You can imagine how that dynamic played out. On one side, you've got 2 guys who see Kiss as a lifelong mission. On the other, 2 guys who are increasingly checked out and struggling. Doesn't exactly make for smooth band meetings. But here's where things escalated beyond just tension into something genuinely dangerous. It was December 1979, the Dynasty Tour, a concert in Jackson, Mississippi, and on stage, mid-show, Peter Criss deliberately sabotaged the performance of one of their songs, just decided to wreck it in front of the paying audience. Paul Stanley, furious, called him out on stage right then and there in front of everyone. Now, in the backstage break before the encore, Gene Simmons, who was not known for letting things slide, walked up and kicked Peter Criss in the shin. An actual kick. These are two adults, two members of one of the biggest rock bands in the world, and one of them just kicked the other in the leg like a schoolyard fight. But Peter Criss wasn't done. He rushed backstage, found one of Ace's empty champagne bottles, broke it against a table, and when Gene Simmons walked into the room, he went after him with the broken bottle. Crew members had to physically intervene and drag Peter away. They somehow regrouped and finished the show. 2 more encores, after a man just tried to attack his bandmate with a broken bottle. And then it was over. Simmons, Stanley, and Frehley voted Peter Criss out of the band. Just like that. Hey, real quick, if you're finding this as wild as I am, and you want more deep dives like this on the untold stories behind rock legends, go ahead and tap the hype button right now. That's the new feature YouTube's been rolling out. It literally sends this video to more people who'd love it. Costs you nothing, helps this channel more than you know. Tap it if you're feeling it, and let's keep going, because it gets even crazier. Part 5. Replacement Parts and Tragedy. So Peter Criss is out, and the band does what bands do. They find someone else and keep moving. Enter Eric Carr, a New York drummer who auditioned for the band in 1980 and became the new face behind the kit. Or the new face with a new face, if you think about it, since Kiss gave him his own makeup persona, the Fox. Eric Carr was by all accounts a genuinely beloved figure. Not just talented, but warm, someone the crew and bandmates actually liked being around. He brought real energy back into a band that had been through the ringer, and for most of the 1980s, he was a stabilizing force. But in 1991, Eric Carr was diagnosed with heart cancer. He was 41 years old. He passed away on November 24, 1991, the same day, as cruel fate would have it, that Freddie Mercury of Queen died. Eric Carr's death was somewhat overshadowed in the media because of that coincidence, which is one of those painful footnotes of rock history that doesn't seem fair. The band was genuinely devastated. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley have spoken about how much Eric Carr meant to them, and it's one of the few moments in Kiss history where the emotion behind the public persona felt completely real and unguarded. Ace Frehley, by the way, had left the band back in 1982, officially citing creative differences, though the substance issues and interpersonal friction were clearly major factors. Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer eventually stepped in to fill the roles, and this is where things get interesting and a little controversial for the long-term fans. Comment prompt. What's your take on this? Do you think replacing original members with lookalikes who wear the same makeup personas is honoring the legacy, or does it change what Kiss really was? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Okay, I have to stop here for a second because I know some of you just had your jaw drop, and that reaction, that's exactly where this channel exists. Hidden Fame Files is all about the stories they don't put in the Greatest Hits documentary. If you're getting value from this, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now and subscribe if you haven't already. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it helps this video get seen by people who'd love it just as much as you are right now. Okay, back to it, because we're not done. Now we get to the most recent and genuinely wild chapter in this whole saga. By the mid-1990s, something interesting was happening in rock music. Nostalgia was back in a massive way. Bands were reuniting, original lineups were going back on the road, and the money was extraordinary. And Kiss, Gene Simmons in particular, who has never met a revenue stream he didn't like, saw the opportunity. In 1996, the original 4 members, Gene, Paul, Ace, and Peter, reunited. Full makeup, full original personas. The Kiss Army went absolutely wild. It seemed like a dream come true. And for a moment it was. But the problems that had broken them up in the first place didn't just disappear because they put the makeup back on. Ace and Peter were still difficult to work with. The substance issues hadn't fully resolved. The creative tensions between the original members were still there, simmering under the surface. And then there was the 2000 farewell tour. This was supposed to be the big send-off, the celebration of the legacy, the goodbye to end all goodbyes, or so everyone thought at the time. Paul Stanley has since described this period as one of the worst of his professional life. In his memoir, he wrote that the experience was deeply draining and miserable, that the dysfunction had reached a point where just getting through shows felt like an ordeal. The unprofessionalism, the interpersonal friction, the sense that the original reunion had curdled into something he barely recognized. Peter Criss eventually left again or was fired again, depending on whose account you believe. Ace Frehley followed, and Kiss continued, with Eric Singer taking over Peter's cat makeup and Tommy Thayer wearing Ace's spaceman makeup, which, for the record, is a move that some original fans still furious about to this day, and honestly, it's not hard to understand why. Now we get to the most recent and genuinely wild chapter in this whole saga. By 2023, Kiss was on the end of the road tour, their latest and by all accounts truly final farewell tour. They'd done farewell tours before, of course, multiple times. The jokes basically write themselves at this point. Kiss has said goodbye so many times that their farewell tours have their own farewell tours. But this time felt different. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley are both in their 70s. The physical demands of a Kiss show, the platform boots, the pyrotechnics, the 2-hour performances are not exactly gentle on a body, and both men had been open about the fact that this really was it. The final show was December 2nd, 2023 at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Sold out, full production, everything you'd expect from Kiss going out with a bang. And then, right at the end of the show, something happened that nobody in that arena was fully prepared for. Digital avatars of the band appeared on stage. Full motion capture versions of Kiss, younger, in their prime, absolutely perfect, performing right there in front of the crowd. And the announcement that followed explained everything. Kiss was not really ending. They were just evolving. In April of 2024, the news broke officially. Kiss had sold their entire catalog, their name, their image, their likeness, everything, to Pop House Entertainment, a Swedish company, the same company behind ABBA's famous hologram concert, Voyage, in London, which has been grossing over $1 million a week since it launched. The deal was reportedly worth over $300 million. $300 million! And the technology behind those digital avatars? Created by Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects company founded by George Lucas, the people who brought you Star Wars. Kiss hired the Star Wars people to turn them into holograms. The first Kiss Avatar concert is currently scheduled for 2027, and Gene Simmons, characteristically, framed it as breaking new ground, which, in fairness, it kind of is. Whether that's inspiring or unsettling probably depends on how you feel about the idea of a band performing forever as digital ghosts. Here's the question I'll leave you with on this one. Is a Kiss Avatar concert still a Kiss concert? Or does there come a point where the brand has simply outlived the band? I'm genuinely curious what you think. Leave it in the comments because I want to have that conversation. Here's the thing I keep coming back to when I think about Kiss. In a lot of ways, they achieved exactly what they set out to do. 4 guys with rough upbringings, no money, no industry connections, and critics who laughed at them, and they built one of the most recognizable brands in the history of popular music. Over 100 million records sold worldwide. 50 years of continuous operation in one form or another. A merchandise empire that at its peak included everything from Kiss coffins, yes, actual coffins with their logo on them, to Kiss-branded credit cards. They did it their way, sometimes badly, sometimes brilliantly, almost always loudly. But the private story, the one that runs parallel to all the sequins and pyrotechnics, is darker and more complicated than the legend allows. The anti-Semitism allegations, the Nazi logo controversy, the broken bottle backstage, the substance abuse that derailed 2 of the original 4, the farewell tours that kept not being farewell tours, the founding member who described the reunion he'd waited years for as miserable, the drummer who died too young, barely noticed because another rock legend chose the same day. These aren't footnotes, these are the actual story. And maybe that's what makes Kiss so enduringly fascinating. Not just the spectacle, but the very human mess underneath it. 4 imperfect guys who wanted to be legends, paid an enormous personal price to get there, and are now literally going to live forever as digital avatars made by the people who made Star Wars. You cannot make this stuff up. So that's the real story of Kiss, or at least as much of it as we can fit into one video. And honestly, there's still more. There's always more with these guys. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. The people who want more than the Wikipedia summary, who want the actual story behind the story. That's what Hidden Fame Files is here for. Drop a comment and let me know what surprised you most from today's video. Was it the Nazi logo ban, the broken bottle incident, the $300 million Avatar deal? I genuinely want to know what hit different for you. Hit the like if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want more of this, and tap the hype button. Seriously, it helps more than you think, and I want to keep making videos exactly like this one. I'll see you in the next one.